What's golden, y'all? It's Brian back with the Tuesday night live stream. This episode, I'm gonna get into it. We're gonna talk about. I'm gonna get you caught up on what's happening in the latest Hulk run by Philip Kennedy Johnson, the Infernal Hulk, and kind of talk about what happened to lead up to this. Um, we're going to be talking about some media literacy kind of stuff, specifically when it comes to hip hop journalism and why I think hip hop journalism is largely cooked. Um, and then we're also going to get into some talking about historical reporting of Black folks getting lynched back in the days. And so that's what our topics today are. Again, if you're joining me in the chat, understand that I kind of pick and choose which chats I'm going to show. And so if you're coming on here on some BS, I mean, it is what it is. But I'm going to keep things pushing here. So first things first. What I'm reading right now, and I'm trying to be fair because I've been kind of harsh on Marvel, if I'm being honest with y'all. I've been really harsh on Marvel just because DC seems to be making the better products. They seem to be dropping the better books, but there's some consistency. Like Philip Kennedy Johnson is doing double duty in Marvel and DC. He's writing, I think, one of the Superman books. I think he's writing a Batman and Robin book, and he's doing Infernal Hulk. And I'm really liking Infernal Hulk so far. We're about 3 issues deep. And so I want to talk about it, kind of get y'all caught up on what's happening in the world of the Incredible Hulk. But first of all, let's welcome everybody back to the stream, y'all. All right. Where's my sound effects, right? Oh, my sound effects ain't even on here. All right. Yeah, welcome back. Here's the thing. So if we're talking about the latest Hulk run, let me put him up on. Let me put the new Hulk up on the screen. So this is Infernal Hulk. Basically, what this is this is another version of Hulk without Banner. And the last series that we've had leading up to this, it was really a return to form with Marvel, specifically with the monster part of it. For those that don't know, back in the days, Marvel used to be pretty heavy with the monster side of things. And so they had a lot of monster stories, and it was really the formation of a lot of stuff in the Marvel universe. And so the Hulk last series was fighting monsters. And I'm talking about like witches, elder gods, demons from hell. There's one specific story where he wasn't, yo, what's up? There was one specific sequence where he wasn't really even working on, like, the Hulk wasn't even fighting against this ghost that was haunting him. He was actually helping a murdered little boy basically solve his own murder, and found out that the dad was the culprit and absolutely gave dad the business. What's up? Like in the Hulk fashion. I'm kind of messing with the Philip Kennedy Johnson's Hulk just because for a long time we've seen this weird kind of Hulk where and I know that Immortal Hulk really leaned into the body horror stuff of it and really painted Hulk as a hero who will kill you. He will absolutely hurt you. And so we're still leaning into that. And so when Hulk in the last series, when he found out, the ghost of this little boy, his dad had killed him, Hulk messed bro up. Like, he beat the shit out of him, beat the Jesus out of him. And here's the thing, the thing about it is you have this character that basically has a capacity for unlimited strength. When he interacts with regular people, if he touches you, he's going to break something. He's going to pop something, like he's going to hurt you really bad. And so I kind of like this version of the Hulk as opposed to the Hulk that's kind of walking on eggshells or magically will go on a rampage where nobody dies. This version of the Hulk ain't about that action. And so what we saw in that run was the Hulk basically fighting the children of the Mother of Horrors, who Mother of Horrors is kind of a newer, and I'm saying horror, like Mother of Horrors, not like Mother of Horrors, but Mother of Horrors. The Mother of Horrors is basically the progenitor of all the monsters on in the Marvel universe. Any kind of um any kind of weird monster that you've seen, typically they say that they're descended from the mother of horrors. And um the dragon, if you will, the secondary antagonist who ended up becoming the primary antagonist, was the eldest. And the eldest was, it was basically the oldest progeny of the mother of horrors. And so in the climactic battle, basically you find that Hulk and Banner are forcefully separated. The eldest that found a way around some magic that Brother Voodoo had put on the Hulk, and so they found a way to essentially rip the Banner persona out of the Hulk, and the eldest merged with the Hulk. And so the Infernal Hulk that you're seeing isn't Banner. It is Hulk plus the eldest. And so basically, so far, episode or books 1 through 3 have been kind of setting the stage for what's happening. And there's some psychological things that I kind of dug out of it. You guys can't quote me on this one, but it's just my interpretation as a guy. I have my own version of neurodivergent soup going on up here, and so I'm gonna just tell you how it relates to me. So anyway, we start with we're going to start with Infernal Hulk #1. And I'm really leery about putting full panels up on here because I don't want to get jammed up on YouTube or whatnot. I'm still trying to figure out that landscape. So you just got to have to walk with me. So basically, Infernal Hulk opens up in Red Creek, Kentucky. And it's kind of framed as a regular place, like your run-of-the-mill place in Kentucky. And evacuation sirens start up. Workers, like there's a worker called Bridger. They're there for something. They're there for something else, right? So the National Guard sets up a perimeter, expecting the Hulk to come crashing through, right? And the Hulk shows up in Hulk form. Now they've seen the Hulk acting erratically. They're not quite sure if this is Banner. They're not really sure what they're dealing with. This is not the first time that somebody else has hijacked the Hulk. And so they're kind of used to this. Okay. But there's confusion about whether this is Dr. Banner or if he's still involved, if Bruce Banner's still involved, because this is not a regular Hulk situation. Hulk comes through and wreck shit. Like in really short order. Yo, what's up? What's up? In really short order, Hulk lets them know that this ain't the same motherfucker. Like he's not the same Hulk. We get a chance to see what happens when, if y'all follow the Hulk books, you know that his favorite move is that clap, right? That thunderclap. We get to see what happens if you're a regular ass person standing next to the thunderclap. Basically, clap somebody's head off, like to kind of let them know, nah, this ain't Banner, y'all. And so soldiers panic. Hulk starts. The eldest in the Hulk's body starts like wrecking shit, like destroying everything, and essentially he's trying to raise an old monster city that was a living city on that site. And basically the eldest is trying to raise it out of the ground, and invariably turns a lot of the National Guardsmen and a lot of the workers into like mutated monsters. Essentially, they're citizens of this city that he's trying to raise. Let me find the name of it. Going through my notes here because I took a lot of notes on this one. Soldier named Travis is killed and begins transforming into something monstrous. Bridger mercy kills him rather than let the transformation complete. Like the Infernal Hulk is basically trying to, long story short, the eldest is trying to use the Hulk's body to jumpstart the second age of another age of monsters. Okay. And so the Infernal Hulk summons, I can't even say it. It looks like Golgothia. That's how I wrote it on here. It's a living city that rises from the ground, and it like infrastructure rather than destruction. It swallows the battlefield, and it basically is kind of a signal like this is what the eldest mission is, and this is why the eldest hijacked the Hulk's body to basically make it so that monsters can rule the earth again. And so the main character, kind of the perspective character, Bridger, he crawls out and he's messed up. Like I said, I'm not showing the panels because I don't know. I don't want to get jammed up, right? But essentially, Bridger comes out and he's like mutated and kind of monstrous. And Yeah, and so now the Hulk is kind of seated on the throne with these monsters that with these humans he's transformed into monsters, and he's sitting on the throne, um, not rampaging, just kind of chilling. And the news kind of labeled the event the Age of Monsters. And so that's kind of the crux of the story. That's what Infernal Hulk is there to do. That's why the eldest took over the Hulk's body. Um, it was imperative. And if you go back and read what happened, I'm not going to spoil the fallout of it, but there was like this really bloody, hyper graphic, hyper brutal battle between the eldest and Abomination and the Hulk, that led up to this. And so it kind of set the tone for what you're going to get in Infernal Hulk. Nobody is safe. Um, People are dying in grisly, horrible ways. And that's how the book rolls. Okay. So next here, we're heading into actually before we get into book two, we cut to basically Bruce Banner, and he's kind of living this boring, mundane life. And he's at an office party. He's not paying attention to the news. He's intentionally ignoring the news. Um, and they're establishing the split between um, this catastrophe that's happening, that's got everybody on edge, and what Bruce Banner's trying to establish. And you find out that in book two, you find out that I think it might be book two or book three. You find out that he's actually hanging out somewhere in Indiana. Okay, so book two. This is where the Infernal Hulk decides that he's going to go to Atlantis and take that over. And in the process, he interacts with Namor the Submariner. And essentially, I think it's Bucky talking to Namor, basically saying, "This is not the Hulk that you're used to." And Neymar's doing the Namor thing, like, "Hey, I ain't worried about that. He's got to come deal with me." Typically it's the messes that you make, and I have to fix it when it comes to the Hulk and stuff like that. And Winter Soldier is basically telling him, like, "Hey, Namor, you ain't ready for you ain't ready for this version of the Hulk that's coming for you. This is not Hulk as you know him." All right. And they have this suspicion, like it hadn't necessarily been confirmed. We know it as the viewers, but I don't think it's really been confirmed that Banner is not in possession of the Hulk. Okay. Um, that's a very line that was drawn in the first book, where one of the soldiers addresses the Infernal Hulk as Dr. Banner and essentially gets his head vaporized with a thunderclap. It was shocking, but it was dope as hell. Like, I ain't gonna front. Like, I enjoyed it. Okay, so Winter Soldier warns Namor of the threat, but Namor kind of dismisses it as a surface problem, and until the Infernal Hulk shows up in Atlantis. Okay, and the Infernal Hulk, and y'all gotta forgive me because I can't say the names of these monsters. I know it's like Nagathil, and so this is like a kaiju that has been laying dormant under Atlantis, and it's basically an elder god, and it's known as the God Eater, and so it immediately upsets what's going on in Atlantis, and it really forces Namor to take action. Okay, and so basically the new Infernal Hulk, the eldest, announces that the Mother of Horrors is dead, and basically is telling his brother Nagathil that he's running shit now, and of course Nagathil's like, "Nah, I'm the strongest one." You know how it goes. It's basically, there's a lot of thematic elements that follow a typical Hulk story, where Hulk steps on the scene. What do you think about the Epstein case? Just a question. I'm gonna get to it if you stick around. But specifically with the Epstein thing, it's deeper the rap, and there's a lot of other layers to it. I'm an old journalism major, and so I've been doing my own independent thing, and kind of checking sources and things like that. There was a lot in those documents. I'm not going to get too far off topic, but yeah, from the Epstein thing, I think it looks like he was basically he was an asset for multiple countries to establish dossiers on rich and powerful people, rich and powerful perverts, essentially. And so the United States has hands in it, the UK, Israel, a couple of other, I think USSR, not USSR, Soviets had some, or Russia had some hands in it. And so there's a lot there. And there's a lot going on with his financing of the tech sphere. He had his own personal black hacker. If you follow any of those hacking events, you know this person, and he's pretty known in the community or whatnot. But Jeffrey Epstein had his own black hat hacker who could access people's records and things like that, and apparently do that day one exploits of Firefox and a couple of other things. So this was somebody who's working on a pretty high level. I don't think it's as clean cut as everybody thinks it is. I think it leads to it kind of gives an explanation why specifically he was allowed to operate with impunity, because he was connected and he served a purpose as far as these governments were concerned, and he's able to hurt a lot of people. There's some really, 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 really dark shit in that, and so I can't consume all of that Epstein stuff in one go. There's some super dark stuff in there, and I have a heart for kids. I worked with kids. That was my entire career before I started my own businesses. I still work with kids in my businesses, and so anything that hurts children typically is something that bothers me on a really, really, really deep level. And there's some super, super dark stuff in those Epstein files. I don't think it's cut and dry as people think it is, and people are trying to use it as a political football, and it's deeper than all that. And I'm saying that as somebody who did work with abused and neglected kids. You have to really be careful about how you approach that side of things. So anyway, let me get back into this. All right. So essentially, Hulk shows up in Atlantis, raises an elder god. Namor does the Namor thing and doesn't really pay attention to the warnings that Winter Soldier gives him until it's too late. And then Namor decides that he's going to go talk to Hulk, who he still thinks is Banner. Like, the running theme is every time somebody encounters the eldest in the Hulk's body, they assume that it's Banner, because that's kind of the theme. But the eldest quickly lets you know that they are not Banner. And I say they, I'm using they, he or she, because they don't necessarily define it. I've heard eldest described as as female, I've eldest described as male, so I'm just using they. So anyway, eldest raises the sea monster, essentially, who is like their sibling, and announces that they're currently the ruler of the monster, since the mother of horrors is now dead. Essentially, the eldest ate the mother of horrors, which was pretty grisly in and of itself. And so Nagathil rejects the claim, asserting that rulership should belong to the strongest, and then swallows the Infernal Hulk whole. And that immediately is like, ooh, that's a mistake. That's an absolute mistake. Okay. And so basically, Infernal Hulk tears his way out from the inside. Like, he absolutely just starts wrecking shop inside of Nagathil, and forces him to kind of submit and recognize the eldest as the ruler of monsters, in replacing the mother of horrors. Okay. And he forces compliance. He doesn't kill him, but he promises to make him stronger, and ordering it to conquer the seas. And so basically, he's turned Nagathil against the seas to conquer the oceans for the Age of Monsters. Okay. And so Namor is framed as not necessarily a win. Like, it's not a dub it's not an easy dub for Namor, bro. Like, basically, the eldest looks dead at Namor, is like, hey man, I'll get you next time. I ain't expending the energy. When I'm ready to kill you, you gonna know about it. Okay. Because he's not really relevant to the eldest's plans, and it's just a minor annoyance that eldest will come and rectify when they have time. Okay. And he's alive because he's not necessarily useful to the hierarchy they're trying to establish with the Age of Monsters. Okay. So now we jump back to Betty and Bruce. And now they're David and Heather. And for those that are really taking a deep cut with this, if I'm not mistaken, back in the days in the old television Hulk series, it was David Bruce Banner. Like, it was David Banner or David Bruce Banner, if I'm not mistaken. And I'm not talking about the rapper. I'm talking about that was his name when Bill Bixby played him, if I'm not mistaken. And so now we're jumping in with Bruce and Betty. They're using the aliases David and Heather, and they're at an office birthday party. And they're avoiding all the photographs, or avoiding all the news coverage. And all this stuff is happening in the environment around them, right? Okay. And they're really trying to mask and pretend like this is normal, pretend like their lives are completely normal, by overcorrecting to the point where they aren't reacting like regular people to some pretty horrific shit happening on the news. Like if you found out that an elder god had returned and raised another elder god and then raised a living city and then turned everybody, all the humans there, into monsters, I think you would have a little bit of panic, like, ooh, that sounds pretty serious. Maybe I need to have some kind of concern about it. Banner's just like, yeah, he's not even paying no attention to it. Okay. And so, and he makes a small joke. They're trying to have a normal life, and somebody says something to him, and he makes the small joke. This is another deep cut. You got to be old school like me, where you wouldn't like me when I'm angry. Okay. Essentially, he told one of his coworkers that, like, don't make me angry. You wouldn't like me when I'm angry. But he said in a joking manner, but it's kind of a wink and a nod to what he used to tell people in the old television series, like, hey man, move around, move around. Otherwise, you're gonna be dealing with 8 feet tall, 700 pounds of pure green hell on your hands if you don't move around. And so he basically hit him with the you won't like me when I'm angry line. And it was kind of a joke, but it was a tongue-in-cheek way to kind of let people know, like, hey, this is still the same Banner that we're dealing with. And I'll be honest with you, I'm really hoping that we get some kind of redemption arc for Banner, because he has been tremendously unlikable over these last couple of years. An absolute just an abysmal human being. And I understand what the intention was, but it does feel like we've unwound a lot of stuff that happened in the Immortal Hulk, and hopefully Philip Kennedy Johnson is able to rectify that. Because I know in the middle of this, right between Philip Kennedy Johnson and who did the Immortal Hulk? Oh my God, I'm blanking on this. But between Immortal Hulk and Philip Kennedy Johnson taking over the book, there was this weird Donny Cates run where we just basically ignored everything that happened essentially in Immortal Hulk, with the merging of personas, Banner really accepting himself, and we just threw all that away. So hopefully Philip Kennedy Johnson brings some kind of connection back, and some synergy between Banner and the Hulk, because right now Banner is really just an unlikable prick. And I think that's kind of the point. Okay. Issue 3. This is kind of a focus issue on Bruce Banner and Betty Ross and what they're up to. And we're checking in with them. Okay. And it pulls back to kind of reveal Bruce and Betty were trapped in the Requiem plane. Basically, this plane of existence where they were kind of banished after the eldest kind of discarded them, because the eldest was going around collecting all these different variations of the Hulk and was keeping them in the Requiem plane. And so essentially Bruce and Betty were kind of cast down into that, because Bruce got snatched up because of the Hulk. Betty got snatched up because she was Harpy. Okay. And so this book shows their escape from the Requiem plane and how they got out. And essentially Bruce is climbing out of this pit. Again, I apologize, I'm not showing you the panels because this book is brand new, y'all. Again, I'm not trying to get that weird content warning. Okay. And so they're climbing out Requiem plane. Bruce is about to fall. He's carrying Betty on his back while climbing this huge. I don't know if they're climbing out of a pit or whatever, but he's basically climbing out of a bottomless pit. He slips and falls, and Scar, the Hulk's son, grabs him because Scar's down there too, and essentially gets them out of the Requiem plane and goes back in to figure out how they're going to unpack the rest of this, unfuck this situation for the rest of the Hulks, essentially. Okay. So essentially they're showing Bruce and Betty living in Muncie, Indiana, under the names of David and Heather Hamilton. They're working regular ass jobs, and they're avoiding cameras like the plague, and performing, like doing a performance, like they're masking, like they are literally pretending to be normal to the point where it crosses over into being extra normal, if that makes sense, where you're taking extraordinary measures to remain normal. Okay. Bruce is struggling with violent imagery. which basically tells you that the Hulk persona, in my mind, that's saying the Hulk persona isn't quite dead, it's just subdued right now. Okay. And he experiences constant violent imagery. Imagine the Hulk erupting in moments of stress, but he keeps it pressed down and keeps moving, showing that the Hulk is restrained rather than gone. That's really what it is. Um, and Betty is having a hell of a time because, unlike Bruce, who's been kind of a punk ass about this, Betty really liked being Harpy. And that's been established through multiple series. Like, she embraced that she Red She-Hulk, she embraced Harpy, she embraced being the Gamma mutate. Like, she enjoyed it. And um it is triggering to her to see this news and still have to try to pretend to be normal. Like, um basically Bruce is kind of forcing her to suppress Harpy the same way that he's suppressing the Hulk. Okay. And so, um she's bandaged up, she has a bandaged wrist which starts bleeding whenever the eldest comes on the news for whatever they're doing. um and Flash's red Harpy form is kind of framing her instability. Like, she is not comfortable with this mask that she's wearing. Again, Bruce is forcing her to be normal, and she doesn't like it. Okay. um and she feels like she really lost her agency. She felt like she lost her sense of determining what her life was going to be to accommodate Bruce, because, like I said, she liked Hart being Harpy. Okay. And Bruce enforces a single rule: nobody could ever know who they are, reinforcing that secrecy has become like this containment. Like, they're trying to contain who they are. Okay. So, long story short, they get tracked down because, of course, they do. If anything else, Marvel parallels the current state of the country, where it is surveillance world. Okay. And so the Fantastic Four, actually, it's not the entire Fantastic Four. It's essentially it's Reed and Tony Stark tracking down. Okay. And basically start asking Banner what the hell's going on. And Banner's like, hey, I'm not in control of the Hulk anymore, and it's not my dog. Like, it's not my problem, you know? And Tony is basically framing it as Banner's being a punk and kind of hiding in the shadows while the world burns down, which is really what Banner is doing. Like, he's not really messing with this. Like, he's not necessarily addressing this. But then the other side is, what is Banner finna do? Like, what's he gonna do? Run up? He's about to run down on the eldest, who's in the Hulk's body as regular as Bruce Banner? I don't think so. Okay. And so Bruce kind of rejects the moral framing that Tony's putting on him and insists that he's earned the right to be scared, but also says, you know, I earn the right to be normal and have my normal life. Okay. And provide some information about the eldest and kind of points them to the Rec Room plane where all the other Hulks are trapped. Um, and basically he refuses to be a martyr for this entire cause. Okay. And so the issue closes with the outside world crashing back in the news. And the subtext is, in this office, the talk of it is one of the office workers, her son was at that military base. And so now they're getting reports of what happened at that military base. And so now it's being jammed into Bruce's world, essentially. Um, and so the coworker's son is stationed there, and it forces Bruce to lean in and confront, like, he can't necessarily hide anymore. Okay. So here's what my takeaway is. My takeaway is Bruce and Betty are masking. I mentioned it a couple times. They're not necessarily healing. They're not really coming to terms with their new life. They are doing everything, and Bruce is really forcing it. He's forcing Betty to go through this. And in issue 3, you really see the emotional toll that it takes on her. It's interesting, and I like the way that Philip Kennedy Johnson addresses it. It's taking a psychological toll on her because she never wanted to be anything other than who she was. And Hulk and Bruce wanted to be everything but what he was. It talks about how, and this is just my takeaway, she really came to terms with all forms of the Hulk. Like, she loved all forms of Bruce. They were all part of who Bruce's character was. So whether you're dealing with the Green Scar, whether you're dealing with Joe Fixit, any version of the Hulk that she interacted with, she saw that as a part of Bruce. And all those natures, that all those, it wasn't a duality, it wasn't separate, it was all of them combined. and she doesn't think it's fair that she's forced to live in this hiding, and basically toss away the life that she actually wanted for the sake of Bruce. Okay. Bruce is wearing the mask because he spent his entire life suppressing himself and containing the danger and performing as normal as a survival strategy. So the fake life is something he can endure even when it seems to be wrecking Betty. Okay. Betty's not willing to do this anymore. Like, she's over it. You can see the body damage she has. Her wrists are bleeding. It's really taking a toll on her. And you could see it the way that it's drawn in the panels. And she tasted freedom. She tasted agency and having power as the Red Harpy and being able to go and do whatever she wants to. And now she's going back to being a fragile human being, and that's messing with her brain. Feels like she's erasing part of who she is. Okay. So Bruce's masking is functional but coercive. It keeps the Hulk contained, but at the cost of Betty, essentially. And Betty's resistance to masking shows it's coming as breakdowns, it's coming as bleeding, being triggered by seeing what's happening on the news. And the tension between them is not responsibility versus recklessness, is about consent. Betty is not consented to this life. Bruce is kind of forcing her into this existence that she's having. And so I like a couple of the themes that we're really going on with, where we're showing the dynamic between Bruce and Betty. It is not happily ever after like Bruce imagined, where they get to go live this normal life, because Betty never wanted that normal life. She just wanted Bruce. Okay. And it is one of those things, with ADHD, when I started my journey, like, I've been diagnosed since I was a little kid. I didn't know I was diagnosed as a little kid until I got to be in my 30s, and my mom told me about it. But one of the ways I tried to mask was try to medicate until I was normal, and the meds absolutely turned me into a very abnormal version of myself, just because I was taking too high of a dose and all that other stuff. And so that was my way of coping with this, trying to get my mind under control. And Bruce is doing some really maladaptive. I'm not trying to use too many therapeutic words, but this is not a good adaptation. And he's basically emotionally wrecking Betty, just so that he can have his normal life that he always wanted, which he never wanted. She just wanted to be with him. Cool. I'm really enjoying this, bro. Like, I think Philip Kennedy Johnson is cooking on this book. And he's got me into the Hulk. Like I said, I've been really harsh on Marvel up until this point. I really hope that they keep this up. I do hope that they do rectify this schism between the Hulk and Banner, because I don't necessarily think it's productive for the entire story. But I'm here for it. I want to see what they do with it. Okay. So we're moving on to segment 2, and we're going to talk a little hip hop journalism. And a lot of this came by way of the Epstein files dropping. And immediately what happened was, and I'm going to just tell you right now, hip hop journalism is fucking cooked. Because there's no journalists. It's a bunch of people running content aggregation sites, or paid or automated blogs or whatnot. And they just post whatever gets them eyeballs. Okay. And so it's frustrating as somebody who wanted to be a journalist who covered hip hop, to kind of watch all this, because it's, there's a lot of motivated reasoning. People kind of believe what they want to. And media is not the same thing as journalism. I need y'all to understand this. People use the word media as a blanket term, and media is just the container. It's not the method. Journalism is actual discipline based on verification, sourcing, corroboration, restraint, while not leaping to conclusions. You want to have evidence for everything you say. People say that journalists are unbiased. Journalists aren't unbiased. They're biased towards what's true and what they can prove. And they have a strong bias towards that. Okay. And so when it comes to hip hop journalism, a lot of it is just PR for artists, more or less. When the artist is dropping the new record, you're not allowed to critically ask anything of the artist, or even have any critical interpretation of their work or anything. Like, that's what hip hop journalism's kind of devolved to. Okay. And so there is no looking into double checking sources and things like that. So when this Epstein thing dropped, and I'm not going to get into the details of it because people are so fucked up about it. Like, they don't, they're treating this like a political, like I said, a political football. Here's the reality of it. The thing that got me into this was, and I've been following this Epstein case independently for a long time. I used to write for an independent blog that I had. And I got out of it because of, death threats. Go figure. Um, and it's not even death threats towards me. It was death threats towards my family. I can deal with death threats towards me. I don't really care about that. But you talking about my kids and stuff, I'm gonna have a problem. And so I dialed back on the journalistic side of what I was doing. And I was working on, at the time when I dropped everything, I was actually working on a lot of the framing around the alt-right and the rise of Gamergate and all the other stuff that went into it. And this is like 2016. I was digging deep and having conversations and calling people and all the other good stuff. I didn't pursue it. I just dropped it. But anyway, what happened was the Epstein things dropped and people cherry picked their way through it. And they didn't really read the context of anything that was in those documents. And so they cherry picked, and essentially the entire thing that got the hip hop side of it was, Jay-Z and Pusha T and a couple of other cats getting named in the tip line thing. And for those that don't know, those that didn't quite understand the contextual framing of this, there's corroborated stuff, there's stuff that's eyewitness reports, there's stuff that is kind of third party. And I'm not going to go into primary and tertiary and tertiary, secondary sources, all that. I'll do that at another time. Okay. Essentially what happened was, people saw that somebody in 2019 had called a tip line and saying Jay or whoever else was involved in the Epstein thing. One, Epstein did not fuck with black people like that. I just need y'all to understand that. If anything, dude was kind of low-key racist, and it saved a lot of I don't know if necessarily saved black children from being harmed by him, but where he wasn't necessarily 100% all out targeting them. I think black kids probably suffered in silence with Jeffrey Epstein, but yeah, as kind of a proxy, if that makes sense, as kind of a collateral damage for the other stuff that he was doing, and that's how they framed it. But by and large, the framing, the timing didn't really line up to what I was seeing, because we're talking about early in Jay-Z's career when Epstein allegedly worked with him, which wouldn't have made any sense. He wasn't going to pay attention. The way that when I look at it and kind of put together what I'm able to put together from it, this entire Epstein thing, from what I'm looking at, is he was a government asset that was used to trap old perverts. And he was trying to get, like, he didn't even necessarily view celebrities as really that important. He kind of viewed them as a means to an end. He was trying to gain access to heads of tech and finance and government and law, things that actually can transform stuff. There's some rumblings about him essentially being one of the financiers of a lot of right-wing stuff to its conscious power, because I haven't read up enough on it to speak intelligently on it. I'm speaking to what I've read so far. But it looks like he was considered kind of an asset to a lot of other governments. And so they used him to gain leverage and build dossiers on old perverts and horrible people behind the scenes. And so he wasn't necessarily invested in a rapper. They would have been too small time for him. One, two, Jay-Z wasn't really on that national stage quite like that at the time, when the time they're saying he was messing with them in it. Anyway, long story short, they got phoned into a tip line that opened up in 2019. Now, if you know what the tip line is, the tip line stuff was unverified, uncorroborated. A lot of the tips a lot of those tips got followed up on, but they couldn't find anything worth pursuing. And in the old child welfare world, at least locally where I'm at, there's unfounded and unsubstantiated. Unsubstantiated means that there's some hints that some impropriety may have happened, but they couldn't necessarily prove it. But there's enough hints to have reasonable suspicion about it. Unfounded means it's complete bullshit. They essentially said that a lot of the tip line stuff that was coming in was unfounded and unsubstantiated. Just because the people that were getting called in wouldn't have had any connections to any of these power brokers that Epstein was trying to trap in his honeypot thing. Okay. And I've read a lot of this. There's some super, super dark shit in there, to the point where it keeps me up at night. Some of the horrible stuff. Everybody in there needs to be put under a jail. But the people that they are saying, like a lot of this stuff is surface level, and it turned into rap gossip kind of bullshit. And that one lady who has the cocaine habit and the rabid fan base, she latched onto it like she ain't living up under and living with actual convicted pedophiles. Anyway, that's my take on it. So here's the thing. Hip hop journalism, there's a lot of motivated reasoning in hip hop journalism. People are, a lot of people who post news stories are basically posting industry gossip. And they know that they're motivated because they know the gossip is going to drive clicks, and clicks are going to drive revenue. It's going to drive shares. That's what their reason is. It's not exposing anything in the news. It's going viral, and their framework is wanting to go viral. Okay, that's not journalism. That is somebody manipulating the ecosystem of the media to line their pockets and get that free ad revenue, because that's what it is. Okay, so journalism discipline, confusing media with journalism. It allows you to make some very sloppy comparisons and fall into the trap. Like I said, the stuff that passes for hip hop journalism is basically media. It's basically industry gossip presented using the media. Okay, it's not journalism because there's no fact checking, there is no verification, there's no establishing a primary source, establishing a secondary source, establishing some tertiary source, and finding multiple sources and finding corroborating evidence and all that stuff. That shit does not happen in hip hop journalism, bro. It's we got a thing that we heard from somebody else, and we gonna run with it and take it to press and just hope that we don't get sued. Okay, and so in proximity to the Epstein thing, I knew this was going to happen. I knew that somebody was going to pretend like Epstein was really interested in rappers, and he was not. They were low leverage. He wasn't interested in celebrities by and large. There were some that he fucked with, but most times he wasn't necessarily interested in celebrities except as a means to an end to access the more powerful people that these world governments wanted him to gain access to and build dossiers on. It's blackmail material. That's really what he was trying to get. And they allowed him to be a sick, depraved, disgusting, vile human being this entire time because they were getting something in exchange for it. And so we need to be questioning a lot of these governments that allowed it, especially the United States and the UK, because they allowed it. They allowed him to run and be this vile, disgusting human being with impunity, as long as he's providing good blackmail material for the powers that be to get them to knuckle under and to these intelligence agencies. Okay. So here's the thing. There's a lot of motivated reasoning in hip hop journalism, and motivated reasoning is when people do not start with the question of, is this true? But instead start with, what conclusion do I want to be true? And then they work backwards from it. That's hip hop journalism in a nutshell. If you listen to academics, you're typically listening to the motivated reasoning channel because he gets paid by these labels to stir up bullshit and get things trending and things along those lines. And so he has a reason to do the kind of incendiary shit that he does. Okay. And so this happens kind of unconsciously, which is why people are convinced they are being objective while selectively accepting information that supports their existing beliefs. So for a lot of people, that didn't like this artist or that artist, they don't like Jay, they don't like Pusha, they don't like Drake, they don't like whoever. Essentially, they've used that as a framework to say that this thing is true without necessarily doing the due diligence and making sure that the timelines are match. Even the source was highly dubious. Like Tipline, a lot of the Tipline stuff got disregarded outright. They investigated, they followed up on some of the Tipline stuff. They found out most of it was unfounded and unsubstantiated. Somebody trying to has an axe to grind. The real is the frustrating part about it is it does hurt the victims, because what happens is when you are just spitballing and your conspiracy brain starts firing off without any kind of moral anchor, you start weaving these elaborate theories and ignoring what actually happened. Okay. Like I said, hip hop journalism cooked. It showed its ass with these Epstein things, bro. It was embarrassing. because there weren't a lot of journalists out there to say, hey, hold on a second, and explain how these sources were found. And there's a lot of people right now that have not looked any further than some post on social media. They don't really know shit about this, that have made this conclusion that if somebody's named in that tip line, instantly they're guilty. And I'm here to tell you that there are people I could go down a phone. I'm about to age myself. Ooh, I'm about to age myself. I could open up a phone book and just start naming people and calling them into that tip line that they had running, and they would have shown up in the Epstein files, because that's how the tip line works. It's an aggregator. It aggregates all these tips, and then they sift through the tips to see if there's anything there. It's a big fishing expedition. So I'm saying that to say this, and people are going to get mad at me. I don't give a fuck. I've gone through the files. I've actually gone through what I could get my hands on. The reality of it is, the rappers named in the file that the hip hop media ran with without verifying anything, because they don't know shit about shit, is the artists named in there. They're only named in the tip line calls, which don't mean anything because they're unfounded and unsubstantiated. Because if they were just unsubstantiated, they would have drifted over into the main. They had drifted over into the main files, and there would have been a level of investigation that happened with it. It did not. It didn't progress any further than the tip line stuff, and it was only like one instance of somebody called, so it didn't even get duplicated. So it wasn't multiple people calling; it was one person, which is going to probably lead an investigator to think it's somebody with an axe to grind. I'm sorry, I know y'all want me to, the rich hyper capitalist rapper is super evil. I could take issue with a lot of shit, but let's be real here. Let's criticize people for the things they've actually done, and not just bullshit that because people lack reading comprehension skills. Like, let's be mad at the rich guy for the shit that he's actually done, as opposed to shit that you dream up because you lack reading comprehension skills and you don't have media literacy to understand what you're actually reading. Because if you read court briefings, I've read court briefings. You would have known, like, from dead jump, I knew that was bullshit, but I still had to go through my process to verify what that was. And that's not some formal process. I'm not trying to put myself out there as an independent journalist. I've just been trained in it because that's what I went to school for, and that was what my life was going to be before it took kind of a hard turn. And so that stuff never really left me. Okay. Following up on sources, checking out things, that was just kind of my natural bag. And so even before I post something on social media, I always try to establish, is this the only outlet saying this? Is the outlet are all the outlets using the same source for this information, or can I find this in multiple places? And I do my own little cooperation thing to make sure that I'm being factually accurate. Okay. So the two-wing model of motivated reasoning. Wing one is the creator incentive. Most hip hop blogging and YouTube commentary operates on an attention economy, where revenue is driven by clicks, watch times, and virality. Okay, that's their motivation for putting stuff out there. So when that's your motivation, truth doesn't mean shit. You don't really care about what you're saying is true, because you know that if it's untrue, it's going to die in the news cycle eventually anyway. Okay, the system rewards speed, getting to press fast, breaking these stories fast. Okay, and it rewards speed, certainty, and outrage. And it punishes people hesitating, and punishes people looking for nuance, and punishes people saying, hey, we don't know about this yet. Okay. And so on that wing, verification is a cost, because with no immediate payoff, the speculation is cheap and is super profitable. Like I said, a lot of hip hop journalists, a lot of hip hop sites are either YouTube channels or content aggregation sites where they don't verify or fact check shit. They just get it out there because they know people are going to share it. And that's how it runs. And so that's why I keep saying, as a profession, hip hop journalism's cooked, because the other side is the actual hip hop journalists that are out there still trying to apply a journalistic framework to the music and to the culture. They have very small audiences because they don't do the sensationalized shit. It's not sexy. It's not fun. It's not engaging. It's not incendiary. So people don't want to watch it. They want to watch. They want to watch the train wrecks. They want to watch people hyping up bullshit. And so there's not a lot of incentive to be a traditional journalist who covers hip hop, because if you have a bias towards the truth, you end up getting that punished out of you. Okay. Um, Verification is a cost with no immediate payoff, and speculation is cheap and highly profitable. I said that already. As a result, unverified claims, tip line material, or rumors are framed as conclusions because certainty performs better than accuracy. People rather feel right than being factually accurate. And that's not just in hip hop, that's in general. People would rather feel right than being factually accurate. Okay. And so it's not necessarily malice, it's structured pressure because the outcome is the same. The outcome is misinformation travels faster than restraint. That's what it is. Wing number two, there's an audience incentive. Audiences are not neutral consumers. They bring fandom, they bring beefs, they bring grudges, they bring personal worldviews, they bring biases, and things with them. And so your audience is not neutral. So if they're motivated to like or dislike somebody, they're going to run with it. So if somebody already dislikes an artist, any kind of weak evidence feels strong because it confirms on an emotional position they already hold. People get mad at me when I say, yeah, the tip line things weren't really like there's a reason why they didn't really publish those. They really didn't follow up on them. They just exist in the files as things that random people called in. I can literally, I in 2019, I could have taken your name and called you into the Epstein tip line, and you would have shown up in those files because that was a threshold for proof. Because that's not what the tip line exists to do. It's not there to determine any kind of investigatory thing. It's a net to capture as much as possible. Okay. So if someone dislikes an artist, they're gonna any evidence is gonna do. If somebody believes there's a hidden cabal of powerful elite evil elites, ambiguous information gets interpreted as proof rather than a possibility. Because here's the reality: there is a hidden cabal of elites doing shit and hurting people, but they're doing it in front of your face. There's no secret about it. One of them sitting in the White House right now. He doesn't care. He doesn't care. They're doing this stuff in front of your face. They want to keep this shit secret. All right, and a lot of times people think that they want it to for them in their mind, in a sane world, this stuff could not happen to innocent children. It couldn't happen to innocent people in a sane world. And so they have to believe that it didn't happen with law enforcement. Law enforcement's wink and a nod, but it didn't happen with the judiciary's wink and a nod. It didn't happen with government's wink and a nod, but it actually did. And so it's very hard to imagine that this stuff was in, for those that knew what was happening, it happened in plain sight for everybody. Okay. So motivate reasoning lets people feel morally correct without doing any analytical work, without actually going to prove your claim. All right. And because agreement feels, and it works because agreement feels like intelligence. It feels like some shit. This person that you don't like was accused of something bad, and instead of doing some due diligence and saying, all right, let's figure out if this is true or not, you instantly say, well, I don't like that motherfucker, so apparently it must be the fact they must have done something awful because I don't like them. And that ends up becoming the standard. And that's the standard bar for hip-hop journalism. That's how hip-hop journalism is consumed. It doesn't necessarily worry about any kind of factual accuracy or anything along those lines or any kind of journalistic rigor. It's what people are going to share quickly. Okay. This is why the same document, claim, or clip can produce radically different conclusions depending on context and who is being discussed. Hip-hop journalism breaks down specifically because allegations are treated like outcomes as opposed to leads, because that's what the tip line is. It's supposed to establish leads. It's supposed to get a wide blanket of leads for them to follow up on. Okay. And then association being listed is kind of collapsed into participating. And like I said, it doesn't necessarily help the victims. It trivializes the whole thing because you're sitting there like this dude is sitting there worried about low-level entertainers where he's just trying to gain access to CEOs to get blackmail material on them because he had an idea, a good bead on who the degenerates were, and there's going to be some government willing to pay for blackmail information on that degenerate. Okay. So, and here's the thing: if you're reading and this is how you know that you're reading some bullshit, specifically on one of these hip hop news aggregating sites. Okay, if you see evidentiary language being replaced with words like exposed, caught, this confirms, that's narrative work. It's trying to set a narrative. It's trying basically set a narrative for you without allowing you to process any of the information yourself. And then we get the double-edged sword of, now we have the content aggregation hip hop journalism, but then you have the YouTuber who is reaction based, who's live streaming this stuff, and nobody's there to fact check them in real time. And it's all about sensationalizing horrific shit. Okay. Reaction content and aggregation get mistaken as investigation because they're louder and more confident. Because investigation is unsure. You don't really know what the proof is until you actually do the digging. There's a problem with aggregation because most people are not consuming original reporting. They're consuming second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth hand reporting. They're consuming clips from an article, they're consuming one paragraph from a 6-page article and forming full conclusions off of it. It's the same thing that happens with medical research all the time. That's why you shouldn't pay attention to any medical research that comes across on your newsfeed, because typically it's bullshit. They've extracted the piece that people can understand and comprehend and made that news. And pulling that out of context doesn't necessarily give any frame of reference for what the medical research was about. It's the same concept, right? And news aggregation sites are really good at it. They'll take snippets and pieces of bullshit and throw it in there. Okay? And so by the time the information reaches the audience, uncertainty has been stripped out and replaced with this confidence of a narrative. And human beings have a narrative bias. Like, we like to think that they're good guys, and every story has a structure, and it doesn't. We like to think of in terms of antagonists and protagonists. Life doesn't operate like that. So one source gets replaced across platforms until it looks like a consensus, and then even when it traces back to it can all trace back to the single unverified claim. That's complete and utter bullshit. Okay, so here's the thing, and this is a quick reality check. Stop asking whether something is media and start asking whether it was verified. Who is saying this? Where is it coming from? Can you find other sources saying the same thing? And I'm not talking about can you find multiple video blogs or aggregation sites saying the same thing. Can you actually look up and find a different source reporting the same thing? Okay. Ask whether sources are named or uncertainty is acknowledged, because a good journalist is going to say there's elements of this thing that we don't know. We're still uncovering, or such and such wasn't available for comment, or we called such and such for comment and they didn't get back to us. Like those, there's a different bars that you could set. Okay. And ask who benefits if this claim is believed right now. Who benefits financially or socially? Because more times than not, especially when you're dealing with hip hop journalism, you're going to run into the person that benefits the most by spreading this news story and getting it out there is the person posting it, because the shares and virality puts money in their pockets. The clicks, they get paid per click. Clicks put money in their pockets. Okay. And so ask whether the same level of evidence would be acceptable if the claim were about somebody that you liked or about you. What standard of evidence would you accept if you were being accused of something? What standard of proof would you lean into? And that's what you got to run with. Like I said, hip hop journalism is cooked, bro. It's very frustrating as somebody who's done the traditional classic journal, went to school for journalism. That was what I wanted to do and stuff. Very frustrating to see people misinterpret this stuff. And it's hard because you end up being the bad guy when you're saying, yeah, that thing that you all believe fervently and they're sharing hasn't really been sourced or proven yet. And you guys are just spreading stuff about somebody you don't like. I get it, but it's not helpful. All right. So we're on to segment 3. So I was doing the TikTok-y thing and just kind of scrolling between streams this week. I'm rebuilding my content studio and stuff. So I got some business stuff I'm doing. And so I'm building a content studio for business owners who want to learn how to record themselves and stuff like that. And so in the interim, I need to give my brain a little bit of a break. So I will doom scroll through TikTok. And I landed on this young lady. I'm not going to say her name. You guys can look her up. I don't want to give her that kind of level of consideration. But this young lady, and it matters that she was Indian American, you know, descent, parents immigrated from India or grandparents immigrated from India. It made a difference. And I'm going to explain why in a second. But she basically was talking about the entire Pam Grier thing, and Pam Grier talking about how she, how traumatizing encountering lynchings was growing up in Oregon. And the timelines would have matched up. But this young lady basically went into the records, went into the archives to figure out when was the last documented lynching in Ohio. And invariably, she found out that it happened before Pam Grier was born. And in her mind, this was enough proof. And so she decided to basically dunk on Pam Grier and everything else and say that she's driving division and blah, 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 blah. Here's what the reality is. And I'm going to ask you this. If we're talking about Jim Crow segregation, do you think that the lynch mobs kept accurate records of the people that they lynched? Do you think that the police department during Jim Crow, during segregation, kept accurate records of the people that they disappeared? Do you think the news agencies even cared that a black person went missing? There are so many black people that have just up and disappeared in this country. And the media, it still happens to this day, hell. But specifically during segregation, there are so many black people that disappeared, and there's so many black oral traditions of families telling about a relative who didn't come home one day and what people think happened to them. And more times than not, they ran afoul of somebody that hurt them and discarded them. So the general discussion was this TikToker claiming that Pam Grier was lying about lynchings in Ohio because she couldn't find sufficient archival records to validate her account. Here's what happens, specifically with black people when we're talking about segregation times. Archival records don't really tell our story. Right now, I'm experiencing that with the family tree. Like, I have to go digging and digging and digging to find different slave records. Like, I have ancestors who have multiple names because some couldn't read or spell, and so their name was spelled phonetically, and it doesn't necessarily align. There's a huge gap in archival knowledge for black folks in this country because we weren't necessarily valued as anything worth archiving. Our existence wasn't worth documenting for some people. There are people in this country right now, if you were born in a major city in one of these municipal hospitals, that doesn't exist. If you're over 40 or 50, you're going to have a very, very difficult time getting your birth records because they didn't keep track of that stuff. There's no record of you being born, depending on what city you're from or what hospital you went to. That was, a lot of them happen to be hospitals in black neighborhoods that when Reagan cut off funding for a lot of that stuff, those hospitals ended up getting shuttered through the 80s and 90s. And those records of the people that were born in those hospitals who were normally disproportionately black just because of where the hospitals were situated, they don't have those records. Okay. So the idea that, because there was no archival evidence of lynchings in Ohio, meaning that lynchings didn't happen after, I think, that like 1910, it's fucking ridiculous. It's a lie. All right. The accusation is not neutral skepticism. It's an attempt to discredit some of the black person's lived experience by treating archival silence as proof of safety. The fact that there was no record of it. Again, a lot of lynch mobs. I doubt that there are lynch mobs that kept accurate records of black people that disappeared. I know newspapers didn't. That's why a lot of black newspapers started, so that we could actually document stuff that happened within our communities and document the lives of people that live within our communities, because there was no record of it. There was no official ledger of it. Okay. And so it's not neutral skepticism, right? It's basically trying to say Pam Grier's lived experience is a lie. So what's really being challenged is whether black memory is allowed to count as evidence when it's not sanctioned by state documentation. That's what we're asking, right? Like, Does my lived experience count just because the state didn't document it? That's the question. Like, I remember when I almost got, like, and I told my cousins this story. When I was 17, I almost got killed, like literally killed, like gunned down. I'm not going into the whole story. And it was kind of played as a joke as I got older, but that's 90s era, I had nightmares legitimately for months afterwards about almost dying. And so the dudes that almost killed me ended up killing somebody else. And I think they eventually got arrested for it. They never came back and asked me about the attempted murder that they tried on me. They never did that. My story didn't exist to them. Yeah, they didn't care. If we're using archival evidence as standards of things that happen to Black people, you got to understand how dubious that is in this country, because Black life wasn't necessarily logged. And if you've ever done any family tree stuff, you know for a fact that, if you go back far enough, you have to go into slave records where Black folks are kept like livestock, and those records are inaccurate, slipshod. They're as accurate as the person who was keeping track of it. And some people are going to motivate it to do it. Some people weren't. Okay. So this entire no record equals it didn't happen argument is completely bankrupt. Bullshit. And that little girl accused Pam Grier of lying about this thing to sow division in the country and all that stuff, because she, in her sheltered world, couldn't find, a journal of lynched people in Ohio. And I'm telling you that the news didn't cover it. There's probably most of the violence that happened to Black people, especially during segregation, Jim Crow, did not get reported to the mainstream news. The only place it would have been archived probably would have been if there's a local Black newspaper. Black people disappeared all the time. I'm telling you, Black people disappeared all the time. And if you grow up in a Black family, you know this, because if you have relatives that are old enough to have survived during Jim Crow or lived during Jim Crow, a lot of them will have a story of a relative that didn't come home one day and they suspect foul play. Nobody cared. Law enforcement didn't care. The newspaper didn't care, because it was just another Black person disappearing. That's how it goes. So if we treat that as a standard, it's kind of a ridiculous thing. The claim that something didn't happen because there's no official word only works if you assume that the systems producing the records were neutral. They were not. And the system, and you also have to assume that the systems were committed to or invested in reporting on what happened to Black people, or caring about Black people's lives and stuff. And that did not happen. Especially, like I said, segregation era newspapers, they did not keep track of such and such got lynched by a lynch mob. They're not going to do that. There's not going to be archival record. Matter of fact, they're going to pretend like it didn't happen, because they don't want to implicate any of the town's chief of police or mayor or anything being involved in that kind of action, when we know that they were, because there's pictures of it happening. Okay. I'm trying to figure out where I am in my notes. If you want to assume the systems producing the records were neutral, thorough, and invested, you're making the assumption that that's what they were, and they're not. Historically, none of that's true, especially during segregation, especially during Jim Crow. Law enforcement routinely failed to investigate the Black people who died. Newspapers ignored them. The state treated Black people as disposable rather than documented. A lot of Black children disappeared during Jim Crow and never were found again. The police did not care. The newspapers did not care. They never got documented as far as the state and as far as the formal archival agencies. That person, that child, that Black child did not exist. So if you're using it as the standard, like saying, oh, there were no lynchings in Ohio because I can't find records of it, that's a ridiculous statement. Again, we're asking if lynch mobs are keeping accurate records of the people that they killed. Did they take roll? Did they take attendance? Did they say who was involved in it? No, they don't. And so the little girl's premise was entirely flawed from the jump. Okay. So historic consistency is clear. Absence of records is often a product of power, not proof of innocence. Okay. Black people disappearing and dying in custody or being found dead without investigation was normal That was the normal expectation of life. Okay. So this is ignorance. This is weaponized ignorance. Okay. Because black archival gaps are used to accuse a black older person of lying about racial terror. It's not critical thinking. Well, I couldn't find a record of it, so it didn't exist. Just like somebody tried to tell me that Aaliyah on the internet, they're trying to tell me Aaliyah was slept on by the black community because when they pulled up Billboard's charts, they didn't see her stuff charting as highly as they thought it would. I used to do charts for radio. The Billboard charts were really super inaccurate when it came to urban radio because urban radio typically, a lot of us didn't participate in the charts. And those of us did just wrote some shit down and sent it off to the reporting agencies. Aaliyah was getting a heavy play in the hood, but just because it wasn't documented through Billboard always had a difficult time logging black music and who was getting spins and whatnot. Because for a lot of times, black radio stations either financially couldn't participate in the charting procedure or they were excluded from it. So using archival evidence and expecting that to be the end all be all, whether racial violence happened to a black person during segregation, is ridiculous. You're expecting the newspaper to report it. That is absurd. It's an absurd, unless it was really, really egregious, you're not going to see the newspapers covering it. Okay. Is skepticism selectively applied to silence testimony that makes people uncomfortable? She was trying to mask and make saying this thing that Pam Grier documented or said on The View made me uncomfortable, and so instead of leaning into it, I'm gonna go do research to determine whether this thing happened or not, and her research is bullshit. Okay. The oral history of Black history is a thing. Like families have stories that we tell and pass down because we know it's not documented in any book. There's no history book that's going to document and communicate things that happened in the family internally for Black folks. Okay. Black history is relied on oral testimony because written records were controlled by people who had no incentive to preserve anything about Black people, any record of Black people even existing. They're not going to do it. But oral history is not inferior evidence, right? It's often the only surviving evidence when other institutions were hostile or indifferent. And to be honest with you, there are white folks that have an oral tradition in their family about things that happened, family stories that got passed down that didn't necessarily get cleanly documented or logged somewhere. But for Black people, it's different because for a long time in this country, it was illegal for us to read or write. And so the only way we could communicate stories about ourselves to subsequent generations was through folk tales and oral tellings of things and songs and things along those lines. That was the only documentation that existed. And it kind of carried into it because, like I said, mainstream newspapers weren't covering Black people who disappeared. Are you serious? In the 1940s, some Black person disappeared. Do you think the newspaper's covering it? Hell no. It didn't happen, especially in Ohio. People act like Ohio was like this super north town. It is. It's north, but Ohio is just as bad, can be just as bad as any other Jim Crow or segregated state. Okay. Treating oral testimony as unreliable while treating racist archives as neutral is malpractice. Okay. And so I said that to say this. The young lady who was doing this was I think either her parents immigrated from India or whatnot. And one of the issues with that is specifically there's always this weird anti-Black thing that goes on, specifically with a lot of right-wing influencers. There's like, it seems like to be this disproportionate amount of people that are that are Indian born or from India or whatnot, or their parents come from India or something. And a lot of it has to do, there's layers to it. Like there's the caste system that goes into it. There's an entire caste system that penalizes or punished for a long time, punished darker skinned people from India and stuff like that. And so that leads into it. Like if you look into it, Gandhi was a virulent racist, bro. He did not fuck with Black people at all. And you can read some of his writings and things along those lines. Okay. That stuff doesn't happen in a vacuum. And so her complete disregard to the point where she's calling Pam Grier a liar without any real evidence because there was no record of the lynchings. Again, they don't do censuses. They weren't taking roll at lynchings in the 40s. Like, are you being serious? And so there was a lot of anti-black sentiment in parts of the Indian diaspora. I can never say diaspora, and it has history. Okay, like I said, Gandhi had really anti-black views during it from his time in South Africa, arguing that Indians should be positioned above Africans in the race hierarchy. And a lot of the ideologies did transfer. I'm not saying it's like everybody. Of course, it's not everybody. All generalizations are false, but there's a very strong anti-black dark skin bias in a lot of different cultures in the world, and so instantly, if they see a black person talking, there's going to be that level of credibility. Here's what my bigger issue is. Naming the history is not an attack on brown people, right? It's saying what it is, right? Here's the thing: the civil rights era is non-negotiable, right? The civil rights era set the stage for a lot of people to immigrate to the United States. The 1965 Immigration and Nationality Act doesn't exist without the civil rights era. So we set the stage for a lot of people to come in, and I'm not saying that they owe us anything, but for a young lady to be as anti-black as she was on her thing, and all but accusing Pam Grier of lying just because she couldn't find a record of a lynching where they took a roll call and said, this is who today, this is who we killed. It was really ugly. Like I said, her stream was really ugly. I'm not going to name who this was. I really not. But prior to that 1965 Immigration and Nationality Act, immigration was really lily white. Okay. Black people kind of forced desegregation. I don't like that framing of it, but that's what it was. Segregation was kind of a negotiation to keep in their mind specifically after Dr. King died, after he's murdered. They're trying to keep the country from turning upside down, and so it was kind of given to prevent an actual uprising, because that was what the powers that be actually feared. If you've ever read the book "We Will Shoot Back," it's about armed struggle, armed resistance in the Mississippi Civil Rights Theater. And Mississippi wasn't a complete outlier. They're scared of uprising, and so a lot of these civil rights era bills were passed to essentially placate the element that they were scared of turning shit up. Okay, so many of the people now questioning Black historical memory benefit directly from the doors of Black Americans kicked open. You know, she gets to come in essentially as an outsider. Like, I'm not even saying that she's an outsider as an American citizen. I'm saying she's an outsider to Black people's history in this country, and question aspects of our history, question the oral traditions of Black folks. And it's crazy to me, because it's like, you wouldn't even be here if it wasn't for Black folks. Like, you wouldn't be in this country. Like, the 65 Immigration Nationality Act made it so that they couldn't just only admit white folks. That's what it did. It kind of desegregated to a degree. Like, everything's nuanced, right? Desegregated immigration to a degree. So she wouldn't even be here without necessarily without Black folks, without the civil rights era. Her parents wouldn't have got immigrated here. Grandparents wouldn't have immigrated here. But she gets to be online and cosplay as a white girl because she's fair skinned, because this, that, and the third. And so, and then she gets to heap scorn or point fingers at Black people saying, yeah, we had lynchings where I grew up. Well, there's no historical record of it. They weren't documenting all the Black people that were murdered extrajudicially. Extrajudicially. They weren't documenting that shit in newspapers, bro. Like, there were some outliers, but more times than not, they weren't documenting it because there's some powerful people that were involved in it. If I look at the case of Willie Brown specifically in Omaha, it's pretty recent, the fact that Tom Dennison, who was basically the mob boss of Omaha, orchestrated that entire thing, trying to get the mayor lynched because he lost an election and he used Willie Brown's body as a methodology to try to resume gay political power. It was so egregious and so violent and so viral or so vile that it actually had to get reported in the newspaper because the mayor got lynched. They tried to hang the mayor. That's what happened here. If it was just Willie Brown and there were no white folks involved or white folks armed, we probably wouldn't have seen anything about it. But the news covered it because he happened to be, in their world, collateral damage to this thing. Okay. So I'm skipping some ideas because I'm kind of getting tired of talking about this. Erasure plus entitlement is the real trigger, right? The anger is not about tone or discouragement. It's about erasure combined with entitlement. It's about benefiting from black people sacrificing and then insisting those sacrifices were exaggerated or imaginary, because that's what she did. And the pattern's consistent, right? Aligned with whiteness, dismiss black people's testimony, and then retreat behind facts generated by racist systems. There was no archive of, there wasn't some big running, ongoing, like this is a modern thing. The fact that we are tracking who got lynched and who got disappeared is a modern thing, and it requires a lot of groundwork going back and doing investigative work to figure out this person did disappear and their lives mattered, so we need to figure out what happened to them. But at the time, the only people that were really caring about it were the families and friends of the black folks that got disappeared. Okay, they didn't take role at lynchings. I got to keep saying this. They did not take role at the picnics where they lynched people. They didn't do that. There's lots of black people that got disappeared and killed, and they never, ever, ever got a funeral. Nobody ever knew what happened to them. It just happened, and they disappeared into the ether. And because the newspapers didn't care, law enforcement may or may not have been involved in it. There was no archival record of it. So if somebody did get lynched, you're not going to see a record of it because it doesn't exist. Because the people that were in charge didn't want it to exist. Okay. It's about believing. It's about. I'm going through the aspects of it. When somebody demands, "Show me the records," the response is simple and final. If the same systems accused of ignoring Black Death are the only ones you trust to confirm it, it's not skepticism. That's you outsourcing your judgment and acquiescing to power. That's what happened. So, I do appreciate y'all tuning in. I ended kind of on a down note. Like I said, I don't want to name the young lady. I don't want to give her any traffic or anything, but it just was something that was sitting on my heart that I had to put out there. I'm gonna hit y'all later. Thanks for tuning in. It's been Blurting While Dad. See y'all next week. Peace.